What's going on, everybody? Championship week is upon us. You've been waiting all season, and it's finally here. And we got your waiver wire for week 16 coming right at you. First four down style. Let's get it. What is going on, everybody? It's week 16. It's that championship week, man. And we just had a very fun and eventful week 15. You know, the first round of the playoffs for a lot of you. And there was some real booms, out there. And especially this week, there's some real, firepower on that waiver if no one picked it up in your league. So hopefully you moved on. It's week 16. It's time for the championship. There's no holding back now. It's all or nothing, winner take all. So we can jump right to the waiver wire. So for this week, we can start right at the quarterback position. And it's going to be a little different this week. All streams. You need one win. You're picking up players that are going to go right into your lineup. So we're going to start at the quarterback position. The number one quarterback for me, Phillip Rivers. Now, he's owned in 60% of Yahoo leagues. There's still 40% of leagues he's unowned. So if he's available in your league, I like him this week as a stream. He's at home against an Oakland team that's realistically just given up. You saw last week they lost to the Jacksonville Jaguars in their last home game ever in Oakland. It was pretty embarrassing in my opinion. I'm a huge Oakland fan. But, they let the Jaguars take care of business and, get the win. So I like Phillip Rivers in this matchup to really take it to the Raiders. Phillip Rivers has a very safe floor at 10-plus fantasy points. So, it's worth the risks if you need to take it. If you got a quarterback that's in a tough matchup, he's definitely a stream for me this week. My number two, it might surprise you, is Drew Lock. Now, I had him on the waiver wire last week. And I knew it was a pretty tough matchup this week going against Kansas City. They've had one of the best secondaries in the league over the last 15 weeks of football. That's pretty crazy. So, but this week you got Drew Lock at home against the Detroit Lions, and that secondary has been destroyed, demolished over the last 2 weeks. To the tune of 7-8 touchdowns. 300 plus passing yards. So, and in an offense where it looks like the Broncos have really turned the corner and started to throw that football, you definitely want to make sure Courtland Sutton's healthy. But Noah Fant's also an option in that passing game. And, Drew Lock's throwing the ball pretty well. He's looking good to me. And if you're in a pinch, don't get me wrong, it's the championship. I get it if you don't want to take a chance on Drew Lock, but I think he has a lot of potential in this game to have a very big game. So my number three stream for the quarterback position has got to be Ryan Fitzpatrick. Now, you saw last week he had all his weapons healthy. He's also starting to run the football a little better. With the lack of run game, Patrick Laird just isn't doing it between the tackles. No one realistically this year for Miami has done it between the tackles. So I like Ryan Fitzpatrick, man. He's been putting it on the ground, getting 40, 50 rushing yards. On top of that, as long as all of his pass catchers are healthy, Devontae Parker and Albert Wilson, they played last week. They're at home against Cincinnati Bengals secondary that's been beat. Don't get me wrong, it's not the best matchup, but it's definitely a good matchup for Ryan Fitzpatrick here, so I could definitely see a stream. Also, you could possibly think about streaming Eli Manning. He's another just mention for me on the road against the Washington Redskins, whose realistic defense has been terrible also all year. So if Eli's going to get his last start, you know what? Yeah, I would take a chance with Eli. So next we moved right to the wide receiver position, and this is a guy that should have been probably waivered last week, but definitely the number one waiver. It's got to be Brashard Perriman. I mean, you saw last week over 100 yards, 3 touchdowns against the Detroit Lions secondary that's absolutely atrocious. He's at home against the Houston Texans secondary that's been beaten up also, And so also he's also the only healthy option at the wide receiver position. I mean, you saw Chris Godwin leave the game with a hamstring injury and pretty much already all but ruled out for Saturday's game. So, and Jameis Winston's going to play. Jameis Winston's throwing the ball a ton, and he's getting tons of passing yards. So, Brashard Perriman, hands down, has got to be the number one wide receiver. He's got to go right into your lineup. Wide receiver 2, flex guy, wherever you can fit him in, find a place for him because it's unbelievable. So, number 2 wide receiver for this week's stream option, I like Chris Conley on the road against an Atlanta secondary that's been better of late, but without the health, we got to look at the health of DJ Chark. If he can't go with that ankle injury. You saw Dede Westbrook just kind of out of sync and didn't really get much love in the passing game last week against the Oakland Raiders, who have a below average secondary. I like Chris Conley. Saw the end zone twice last week, 2 touchdowns. And he gets targeted down the field, just more than Day-Day Westbrook, in my opinion. So Chris Conley's a guy that, if you got a spot in your flex, could possibly, fit right in there this week. And then number 3's got to be Anthony Miller. Now, yeah, he's been lighting it up over the last 4 or 5 weeks, playing very well. Mitch Trubisky's been throwing the ball a lot, averaging close to 300 passing yards per game over the last 4 weeks. But he is in a very tough matchup. They are at home, but they're playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who've ultimately had the best secondary in the last 10, 15 weeks, realistically. So I like Anthony Miller. He's definitely a guy you can flex. I think he'll see enough volume to be able to be a viable option. But, definitely I don't think he's going to boom here. It's going to be on the safer side of, 10, 12 fantasy points. So, if you're trying to play it safe in the championship and try and get there, I get it. Anthony Miller's definitely an option. So a couple of mentions also at the wide receiver position. I like Kenny Stills. You saw last week 2 touchdowns against Tennessee Titans. And then this week he's got Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You got 2 teams with terrible secondaries. This should be a flat-out shootout, in my opinion. So Kenny Stills is a guy, you never know. All it takes is one play, and he can get a big touchdown. So if you're looking for some players to boom, Kenny Stills is an option. Another one on the other side of the ball in that same game, Justin Watson. Now you see the lack of pass catchers for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. With Godwin out, Mike Evans out, Justin Watson's a guy I think they can easily fill in and, find some love in that passing attack of James Winston. I mean, been lighting it up over the last few weeks. So next we move to the running back position. And this week there's not too many, big pickups that you're going to plug and play. The top one's got to be Mike Boone or Alexander Madison. Both on the Minnesota Vikings. Very run-heavy team. Dalvin Cook is looking questionable for that game. They're saying he feels good. They're saying he can play through the injury, but every week you see it, he takes one wrong move, and he's out for the game. So, this is a guy. These are players that you could pick up that could potentially be RB2s. Whether it's Boone or Madison, we'll have to wait and see, but I'm definitely leaning toward Boone. He's the healthy option. He had 50 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns last week. And they're going against the Green Bay Packers at home in pretty much a must-win game. So, and Green Bay's been susceptible to the ground. They've given up, I think, the 10th most fantasy points on the ground to running backs. So, definitely Mike Boone and Alexander Madison. Look to maybe try and get both of those if you got spots. See who's healthy if they can play, and that it depends on Dalvin Cook's health, obviously. So, make sure it's not going to be your guaranteed plug and play, but definitely a viable possible RB2 right there to pick up. So. My number 2 at the running back position has got to be Adrian Peterson now. 3 straight games with a touchdown. He's looked very well running between the tackles, and Washington's offense is slowly starting to come around. So this week you got him at home against the New York Giants, and definitely a game where you could flex Adrian Peterson. Anywhere from 60 to 80 rushing yards I could see, and a touchdown. So definitely a viable option, here in championship week if you're trying to play that safer route and just try and, manifest that 10 to 15 points, try and make sure every player gets there to give you that chance. So my number 3 running back's Boston Scott on the Philadelphia Eagles. Now you got to worry about Jordan Howard if he's healthy, if he's coming back. You're not obviously going to plug in Boston Scott, but if Jordan Howard's still ruled out, you saw last week, even with Miles Sanders really lighting it up, Boston Scott still quietly had about 10 fantasy points in PPR, So he's seeing that production. And then on the same token, there's still no pass catchers for the Philadelphia Eagles. Alshon Jeffrey's out. Ward's looking okay, but it's hard to trust. You can't really trust him in a spot, especially in the championship. So you're definitely staying away from him. I like Boston Scott to possibly get another 10 to 12 fantasy points. So if you're really struggling, for me, I'm looking elsewhere, and if you don't have a RB2, I'm sorry for you, because Boston Scott's not going to be able to take care of business for you, in my opinion, but he can definitely get about 10 points. So we can move right to the tight end position. So my number 1 tight end on the week's got to be Jonnu Smith. Now, I had him as a sit last week. I thought it was a very tough matchup, and he kind of proved me wrong with a 57-yard run from the tight end. I mean, that doesn't happen every week. So you take that away. He had about 50 receiving yards on 4 or 5 catches, so definitely a viable spot to be able to start him. And this week, with Derrick Henry still ailing from that hamstring, you might be able to see Jonnu Smith a little bit in the backfield maybe. You never know. You might see a carry or two. You might see a little more in that passing game. So I like Jonnu Smith. They're going against the New Orleans Saints. Tennessee's at home. And the New Orleans Saints are going to come out and try and put up some points. So if Tannehill's got to sit there and try and match with Drew Brees, I definitely like Jonnu Smith. So my number 2 tight end's got to be O.J. Howard, Tampa Bay. You're waiting for this guy to finally have a great game, and it just hasn't happened yet this season. This is definitely a spot where it possibly could. Tampa Bay going against the Houston Texans, and it's definitely shootout potential. And with the lack of pass catchers, you got Chris Godwin out, Mike Evans out. James Winston's going to throw the ball 50 times. I like O.J. Howard. I mean, especially to get anywhere between 60, 70 yards. He might find the end zone. He's going to get you 4 or 5 catches. He'll get you close to 10 fantasy points. So I like O.J. Howard as a solid floor guy this week, and definitely a viable fly option. So my number 3 tight end's got to be Noah Fant. And just as I go back to why I like Drew Lock, I also like Noah Fant. Drew Lock's really, shown confidence in Noah Fant. And Fant's been taking care of business. He's been putting up some decent fantasy production over the last few weeks. And he's going against the Detroit secondary, which is middle of the road for tight ends, but terrible overall. So I definitely like Noah Fant in an option where if you're looking to completely stream a tight end, he's a viable option. So lastly, we can get right to the defenses. So there's actually a few good defensive streams this week. My number 1's got to be Denver. Now, they're at home against the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions, David Blau, since the first week he started against the Chicago Bears, has not looked the part. He's really struggled to get that ball down the field, and Denver's secondary is no joke, top 10. So also I think without the lack of a running game, you saw them mix and matching, piecing together running backs. They're on their 4th string, on the 5th string. Detroit's going to struggle in this game a lot. David Blau's probably going to turn the ball over a couple times. So Denver's probably my top option for the stream this week. At home, I think they should take it to the Detroit Lions, plain and simple. So my number 2 defense, even though they got blown out, is the Indianapolis Colts. So the Indianapolis Colts defense has quietly been pretty good this year. And outside of that game last night where you already knew Drew Brees was going to light him up, I mean, he was on for history. You know how he plays. His whole family was there. So I like the Colts at home this week against Carolina Panthers. They're looking to start their 3rd string quarterback. So it's definitely a viable option if you need to stream a defense this week. My 3rd option is the Atlanta Falcons. They're also at home versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, who've really struggled on offense. And Atlanta has quietly, since the bye week, been a top 10, 12 fantasy defense. Realistically, they've had a solid floor, So Jacksonville hasn't scored over 20 points since week 9. They've really struggled on offense, just putting points on the board. So I definitely like Atlanta as a possible stream option here in week 16 for that championship game. So that's been the week 16 waiver wire. It's the championship, man. It's a must win. It's time to get it. It's time to take, go for it all. You got nothing to lose at this point except bragging rights for the entire year. So it's been B. Scott. It's the first 4 downs. I'm out.